Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. What's the scariest or creepiest thing that's ever happened to you while you were alone at night? Please remember to like, share, hype, listen and ask for shoutouts if you today, and subscribe. One night, a 28 female was asleep and heard someone talking in the kitchen. Casual, clear conversational sounds. I got up and grabbed the knife I keep in my dresser, dialed 911 and walked out into my dining room toward the kitchen. I screamed as deep and loud as I could, "Get out, I have a gun," because in my mind, it's a lot scarier if I have a gun than a knife. The conversation continued. All this is happening with 911 on the phone. I turned the corner into my kitchen, ready to attack, saw nothing, and turned on my lights, all in one swoop. My Alexa, for whatever reason, was reading a book. I don't remember the book, but the narrator was doing different voices for each character, and I thought there were two people talking in my kitchen to each other. The 911 operator was fighting for their life, trying not to laugh at me for my stupidity. I apologized profusely, turned off the lights, and sat awake on my couch for the rest of the night. Both the most terrifying and most embarrassing thing to ever happen to me at night. When I was 6 and my little brother was 2, we were part of the standoff kidnap attempt. I lived in the projects in Houston in the early 80s, and my father was the manager of a cemetery. He fired a guy that day and said the guy showed up with a friend, broke into my house, and attempted to kidnap me and my brother. They made it about the front door before my dad nearly blew one of their heads off with a shotgun, shattering our glass front door. They dropped us, found cover, and my dad and them were in an armed standoff, yelling threats back and forth until cops arrived. I remember more about it than you'd think I would. Trauma is a funny thing. When I was pretty deep in the bottle when I was 23, I lived in the Navajo res in Shiprock, New Mexico. Used to get into it with family, so sometimes when I was drinking I would park in random places just to drink, sometimes with friends or myself. On this occasion, I knew I wasn't going home because I was deep into a bottle of Jack Daniels, so I dropped my friend off around 12 a.m. and went to a place we called Area 7 in Shiprock. It's a very secluded area, surrounded by dead woods and random turnoffs to be hidden, so I was driving and turned off into one of these, hidden, so turnoffs, and when I was deep enough parked, I was just sitting there listening to music, enjoying some McDonald's, and more drinking, and of course, at the time I had a Ford F-150 single cab long bed. I always had a blanket and pillow when I knew I wasn't going to go home, so it was a nice summer night in New Mexico, so it was going to be cool, and I decided I was going to sleep in the bed and watch the stars. Was laying there enjoying the stars and Jack Daniels and managed to doze off around 1:30 a.m. Sometime in the night I woke up for no apparent reason and just laid there when I could distinctly hear something or someone walking around. I just laid there, wondering who the hell was way out here in the middle of the night, but I laid still with my eyes closed because I was kind of spooked but not scared yet. I pretended to reposition myself like I didn't notice something was there, and the footsteps stopped. When I lay there still for about a minute or two, the steps began to move again. At this point, I knew that it was someone for sure walking around the back tire to back tire, peering over the sides of the back where I was laying. When I barely tried to open my eyes, where they wouldn't notice, I'd just seen a figure walking back and forth, looking at me, and I just felt a sense of dread I've never felt before or since. At this point, I was scared because I didn't know if this person had a weapon or what the hell they wanted or what they were doing way out here in the middle of nowhere. At that point, I pretended to move around and sit up despite all the emotions I was feeling, but it took me a while to muster up the courage, mind you. When I say up and opened my eyes, there was nothing there, and I took another drink, got out, and got into the truck. took a look at the time when I started it, and it was 3:35 a.m. I just sat there, stupid I know, but I was just waking up with some music and kind of scanning the area. As I was sitting there, I began to hear a flute. Yes, a flute, but not like a regular one, more like a Native American sounding one, and that's when I got really scared and tried to start the truck, but I didn't want to turn over, so there I am sitting in the middle of the dark with something around me. Before I began to freak out, I just took a big shot at the JD to get the courage and sat there listening. It sounded like it was circling me for about 20 minutes, 4 a.m. by that time, and it just stopped. When I tried my truck again, it finally started, and I peeled out going 80 all the way out of there until I hit the main highway about 10 miles out. Honestly, one of the scarier times alone when I lived in the res. I'm Native American. Cheers. I had just adopted a puppy. She's an 8-month-old Belgian Shepherd that weighs about 40 pounds. She was outside, I live on acreage, doing her business, running around, etc. It was just starting to get dark, so I go out to call her in. My other 2 dogs were in the house. I call for her for a few minutes, with no sign of her. Finally, I see her about 100 yards away walking towards some trees near the barn. I call her, and she continues walking along, completely ignoring me. So I walk down the hill toward the barn to go get her. I'm calling her the whole way down, but see no signs of her. I hear my husband driving up in the distance, coming toward me from the main road. The driveway is about 3/4 of a mile long. By the time I reach the barn, my husband has arrived there too. I go to the car to let him know about the dog when suddenly she comes running up to me, jumps in the car. She's shaking like crazy. She huddles down in the back seat, obviously terrified. We take her back to the house. She runs in and hides in her crate all night, refusing to come out. At that point, we get a call from a neighbor who's just spotted a cougar trying to get to his sheep. I suddenly realize that was not the dog I saw, just a similarly colored animal out hunting. All right, let's get it. We have 3 shout-outs today, happily. So to Gary Coleman 6912, happy to help you through your work day while you either operate heavy equipment, which I don't know if OSHA is safe, but I'm just kidding. Also to Waffle Kingler, Nevin, happy to help you through your work day as well. I hope you continue listening and have a great holiday season. And our friend Robin Robertson, she was asking about my favorite part of Christmas. Cliche, but giving gifts and being together with family, even the ones we love and tolerate. No, I'm just kidding. Everything's great about it. The food, especially, and just the overall general niceness of most people. Still not on the roads, at least here in New York, but people seem to be a little more kind, and it'd be nice if that could extend throughout the year. I lived near a prison growing up, and one night I was alone in the house and I'd stayed back while the family was camping. I had to work that weekend. The town alarm had gone off indicating a prison break, and the emergency broadcast went out over the radio as I was headed home. It was usually someone at minimum camp not making bed check, but you never knew who it was out, just that someone was. I was upstairs, house dark, headed to bed, when I heard a crash downstairs and froze. I think I stood there in the towel for what felt like 30 minutes, listening for more noise downstairs. Years ago, when I was much younger, I had rented my first apartment, and back then, in order to get a landline, it would take 3 or 4 days for the phone company to come out and install the line. So the first night there, I did not have a phone. It was a very old apartment, and luckily had solid wooden floors. I heard someone jiggling the door handle on my 3rd floor apartment, and I could see that their feet underneath the door. It was obviously a man. Now, it was the middle of the night, so I damn sure wasn't going to run out the front door, which was on the other side of the building, and be outside, but all I could do was sit there and hope he didn't know how to pick a lock. You tried the doorknob for a while, but because the apartment was so old, there were 2 deadbolts on it, and he was not able to get in. When I woke up the next morning, I heard on the news that a woman in the next apartment building to me, but within the same complex, had someone knock on her door about midnight and explained that he had a school bus full of kids and the bus had broken down and he wanted to use her phone. Very unwisely, she agreed and opened the door, and he SA'd her. It wasn't the best neighborhood, but I moved out and found the house in a different and better part of town. When I was in my 20s, I lived in a ground floor apartment, and I woke up one morning at 3 o'clock in the morning to someone tapping on my window. I opened the curtains just enough to look outside, and I saw this creepy, middle-aged dude that was trying to look in my windows. I didn't say anything, and I was hoping he'd leave, and he did. But I watched him, and he went to all the ground floor windows, and just was like knocking on them with his knuckle. I reported it to the building the next day, and I never saw that guy again, but that scared the shit out of me. And I made moves to get out of that apartment because, unfortunately for a female living in a ground floor apartment, it's just not safe. I was alone in a rental house I shared with a roommate one evening and heard the default Android notification sound very clearly down the hall. It was like someone was in the next room when they got a text notification. My roommate and I both had iPhones, and he was out of town, so it wasn't one of ours. The hair on my neck stood up immediately and ended up running out to my car, driving down the block and running out to my car, driving down the block and calling the police. They came out, found no one in or around the house, and acted like I was crazy. I never figured out what it was. I've lost both my parents. On my 40th birthday in October, as the clock struck midnight to my birthday, I was watching movies with my boyfriend, and all of a sudden, my phone lit up next to me with Siri, but the little blue bubble didn't pop up, and my phone said, "Hi." And then my boyfriend's phone at the end of the bed randomly just started playing music. We turned both devices off and went to bed. Landline phone, back when I still had one, rang around 3 a.m. Voice said, "Hello, this is BT. We have fixed a problem with your line," and put the phone down. Wouldn't have bothered me if it was just some automated voice or a foreign accent or something. Clearly a pre-recorded thing. It sounded like a knackered bloke with a local Northwest English accent sat in his van or something. So it seemed so odd for him to have called at 3 a.m. if it was a local engineer who'd fixed something on the street, which, without wanting to sound all local town Facebook group, made me worried it was someone checking if anyone was in and awake. I was about 19 and living with my dad, but he was away working. Called the police just in case, and they said they'd send a patrol out just to check. About 20 minutes later, a police car with its lights going did slowly cruise past the house, so satisfied, and with a loaded air rifle and a machete, still legal in the UK at the time, by the bed, I went to sleep. I drove for Uber and Lyft for a bit. In my last week before quitting both apps, I was doing a lot of overnight driving. Got a request at almost 4 a.m. in a shady neighborhood, but I said, "Pick it." Pulled into the front of an apartment complex, and every building was of an ominous white, with dark brown at night black rooftops, and not a single light source coming out of any window. Absolutely dead quiet outside. It was the longest 5 minutes of my life. You have to call them before canceling, and they picked up on my very last ring and gave 0 responses. Chills. I sped the fuck out of there before even finishing the cancellation. I'm a social worker, and I worked at a domestic violence shelter, and I worked overnight by myself. At the time, I was stage 4 kidney failure. I was on medication for high blood pressure. I think it was called Metropol. Out of the blue, my nose started bleeding and bleeding and bleeding continuously. I couldn't stop it. When I was sitting at the desk, and right off the side of my desk was a little powder room. So to keep from being messy, I went to the powder room and literally just stood over the sink, letting my nose bleed. I didn't know how to stop it. I tried to put my head back, but I couldn't move from the sink because it was just flowing. It had to be about 1 or 2 in the morning. Thank goodness there were no calls for women and children to come in at that time. I was using so much toilet paper just to try to wipe my nose, hold my nose, and it was saturating, so I wasn't sure what to do. So I ran to the desk, grabbed myself, and ran back to the bathroom and stood over the sink. I called my husband and told him what was happening. We only lived about 5 minutes away. My husband's begging me to call the supervisor, and I'm so concerned about being an inconvenience and not following up on my job because my husband knows I'm the type of person who will stay and work through any ailment or pain because I've done it before. Another long story. So I finally called my supervisor and tell her what's happening. Mind you, I've not moved from the sink at this point. My husband convinced me that we need to go to the hospital because it wasn't stopping. So my supervisor came to relieve me. My husband had to come in and help me walk out to the car because my nose was still bleeding, and I spent so much time trying to clean the sink before my supervisor got there because I didn't want to leave a mess. I was so scared because I've never had that happen before. I don't get nosebleeds, and later, when I finally got to the ER, I'd been told that it could have been a combination of my blood pressure and the medication, which does cause nosebleeds, and till this day I haven't gotten any nosebleeds. Honorable mention, approximately 2 years later, I was back to work with a master's degree in social work. I was working for a county job, and I had to go out on visits to see people in the community. At this point, I'd reached end-stage renal disease and was on dialysis. The type of dialysis I was on was called peritoneal dialysis, and it's a fluid that goes into my belly, absorbs its toxins, and then I flushed the fluid out. No needles. I can do it at work. I can do it at home, etc. So my dialysis center transitioned me from doing my own dialysis exchanges and put me on something called a cycler. A cycler is something that you attach yourself to overnight, and it does the dialysis exchanges for you, and then in the morning, 8 hours later, I wake up, detach myself, and I don't have to worry about doing manual anymore. So I noticed over a week time that I was having difficulty catching my breath while walking, and I was getting scared because when I would sit still I was fine, like if I sat at a client's house and did my assessment and talked to them and everything was fine. But then, going from their door to my car, I was extremely out of breath. The way that I started on dialysis was that I went into congestive heart failure and went into the ER, and they told me that my kidneys were fully failed and they put me on dialysis. So, as I'm going through this process over a week time, I'm thinking I'm back in congestive heart failure, which is like fluids building up around my heart, and it was just giving me difficulty. So I was very scared that my kidneys were getting worse or I was going to have to go onto hemodialysis. I got to the point where I made an appointment with my cardiologist, who initially was telling me that my EEGs and EKG were all fine the month before, and I'm asking him if he could just do a chest x-ray, because I feel like something is wrong. He did a chest x-ray the same day I went home. He called me and told me that I had 3 liters of fluid that collapsed my right lung, and I needed to go to the ER immediately. My biggest concern was that I had just come back to work and used up my AFLAC sick time, donated sick time and PTO, and being the primary breadwinner of the family, I was concerned that I would have to take time off and we wouldn't have any money. So I literally thought this was like a simple fix. It was on a Wednesday, and I asked if they would be able to get the fluid out and deflate my lung by Monday because I only had 2 days of sick time left. The doctor was like, "If you don't get your ass to the ER, I'm always negotiating a situation." Story of my life. While in the hospital for a week, I decided to go ahead and retire from my job because being on dialysis is really serious, and I just was not able to juggle working and staying on dialysis and taking care of myself. Everything ended up working out in the end, but the type of person that I am, I would have probably continued to work through it. If I had not had difficulty breathing, it had gotten to the point where I couldn't even lay down in bed because the fluid was just too much. Wife was visiting her sister for the weekend. I fell asleep on the couch with the garage door open. I woke up around 2 a.m. and went out in the garage and sat in my camp chair to have a smoke. I heard some noise from the porch, which is just out of view from where I was sitting about 3/4 the way back in the dark garage. I thought it was one of many feral neighborhood cats we feed. A dude in all black with a backpack on and a ski mask comes down our front steps and flips the door handle to my wife's car, then walks over to my truck and also flips the door handle. I was a bit flummoxed at this point, and the best I could muster was, "You need something, Face?" I can remember seeing this dude's eyes open wide enough to fill up the eye openings in the ski mask, and he took off like a shot down the driveway. Whatever he'd accumulated in the backpack was making a clanking noise. I went in and got a handgun and called the cops. They showed up about 10 minutes later. I explained everything that had happened and ended with, "You need something, Face?" To which the cop chuckled and said, "Nice." They drove around for a few minutes, shining the spotlight between several houses, but never found anything. I think it was probably a teenager that lived in our development. I once volunteered to take a sailboat from a small island 14 miles off the U.S. East Coast to the mainland where it lived, as the owner was a friend of mine too ill to do it. I took the ferry out to the island, got on the boat, started the engine, and headed out to the harbor. As I was alone, I had no plans to sail the boat, just motor it home. It would be dark before it got there. But I know these waters very well, and I have full electronics and all. I was 2 miles out from the island when I got socked in with fog instantly. First, there was this fog bank suddenly a quarter mile out, then boom, visibility goes to nil. Not in the forecast and really unusual. Night and fog, totally blind, moving at a snail's pace through some of the most heavily trafficked waters in the US, silent too. I turned off the music radio to try and hear better. But of course my VHF was on 16, and there was all kinds of chatter on that because a bunch of other vessels were in the same situation as me. I was straining to hear anything at all. No skies, no stars, not enough light to see the water around me. I crawled through this fog for about 2 hours, assuming the entire time a ferry or a cargo ship or even a big dragger was going to send me and my dumb sailboat to the bottom at any second. My GPS got me just outside the entrance to my friend's marina, but I still had to anchor a little bit outside the entrance because I still couldn't see shit. I was more or less out of traffic though. That little episode was when I started to go gray, like to the minute. It's not paranormal, but this is probably the most terrified I've ever been in my life. Mind you, I've been jumped, stabbed, and on the brink of death on a few occasions, but this one event scared the ever-living crap out of me. So, I was driving home from a friend's house around midnight. He lives in a not-so-good neighborhood, but it's not super bad, just some gang activity here and there. So I come to a stop sign, and when I'm about to proceed after stopping, a car comes barreling down to my right and runs the stop sign, almost hits me. I slam on my brakes, and they do too. We look at each other, and I give them a what the look and wave him through since he was blocking me. I look a little more closely at the guys in the car, and they look like they're on the same very strong drugs, like hopped up on meth. I guess they must have taken offense to my gesture, and the driver pulls out a gun and aims it at me. I immediately step on the gas and turn off and get out of there. They make a U-turn and burning rubber behind me to catch up. There are smaller residential streets with speed bumps, so I'm going airborne, getting away from these guys, while trying not to run into any parked cars. I'm turning left and right, and these guys are still following me. I turn onto a major street and pull next to a cop. I was going to flag him down, but I'd been drinking and didn't want him to question me, so I just drove next to him and then turned off, heading back home. Out of nowhere, these dudes find me somehow, and now I see that they fired a gun because I see the flash of the muzzle. I'm so damn scared at this point. I try to get back onto the major street, but these guys are right on my ass. This all took place over like 30 minutes, and the whole time I keep thinking that they're going to stop at nothing to kill me. I end up going straight through a roundabout and knock over some plants and go airborne. This put them further behind me, and I see the flash of the muzzle go off again in my rear view, and I'm going like 70 on a small residential street. I finally hit a major street and get the hell out of there. I took every red light without stopping. It was the single most terrifying thing I've ever been through. I had this insanely deep fear in me. I've never felt that ever before, and I hope to never feel that ever again. I avoided my friend's place for like a year after that. Made me realize that there's no need to be scared of monsters. Humans are capable enough to be scarier. We just bought a ground floor condo corner and I was home alone cleaning up after painting. We didn't have curtains up and the patio door was open to let air in. My boyfriend at the time was working nights. I was on my hands and knees scraping paint and heard footsteps in the snow leading up to our porch. I thought they were my boyfriend. After a few minutes I realized he hadn't come in and I froze. I stood up to look, but since it was dark outside, all I saw was my reflection in the glass. I knew someone was standing right on the other side, staring back at me, because like I said, the footsteps stopped there. I was terrified, and that saying about the hairs in the back of your neck was true. I was about 10 to 15 feet from the door, but they were closer. Since I am thankfully not a freezer, I ran to shut and lock the door, then ran into my bathroom and locked that door. I don't know how long I stayed in the bathroom, but since I didn't hear any sound, I grabbed my phone and hid there until my boyfriend came home. I ordered a security system the next day and still remember the fear. I don't know how, but I didn't see a set of footprints leading back away from my patio afterwards. 2 things. 13 years back, when I was 3, I was at my cousin's and woke up in the middle of the night and I was alone in the room I slept in, when my cousin was supposed to be sleeping in the bunk on top of mine. And I look at my feet, and there's a green glowing hand getting closer to the sheets. I really freaked out, but when my cousin came back maybe 30 seconds later it went away. This summer, I was home alone in my room, which is a pitch black basement that's not even a finished room. It looks more like something out of an abandoned house. Anyway, I turned on the light to go to the upstairs bathroom, but I pulled the blinds, which act as my door. I swear there was some movement and a face, which I saw 2 more times the next day. Couldn't sleep for hours. For nearly 2 years, I lived in a bungalow cabin thing in the backyard of a suburban house. It was only one room that fit my bed, a desk, and a wardrobe. It had electricity connected, but I had to go into the main house to use the bathroom or cooking facilities. Importantly, you couldn't really hear anything from my cabin in the main house and vice versa. I also had to lock the door from the inside each night, a deadbolt, as the door didn't seal properly if it was closed with the door handle mechanism. The family living in the main house were creatives, friends of mine, but it wasn't unusual to walk into the house at odd hours and find someone awake working on some weird, artsy, creative project. One night, I got ready for bed, deadbolted the door, and started to fall asleep. Suddenly, while my eyes were closed, I saw flashing. At first, in my half-asleep state, I assumed it was lightning. I listened for thunder but didn't hear any, and there was no rain either. I then just shrugged it off as one of the creatives outside taking flash photos. Then I remembered that I had blackout blinds, and there's no way a flash photo or lightning would be bright enough for me to see with my eyes shut. That's when I started to freak out. I froze and began counting the seconds between each flash. They were totally random, sometimes 10 seconds, sometimes minutes between, but still very short flashes of light. At that point, my eyes were still closed and I was frozen in bed, now convinced that someone was inside my room. Suddenly, a light in my room turned on. At this point, my eyes are still closed, my body is frozen in fear, and I'm now convinced someone is in my room and I'm about to die. Turns out, I'm too much of a coward to face my would-be killer, so I lay still and begin to count internally to 200. After 200 slow counts, I finally open my eyes expecting to see the face of my would-be killer. Instead, I see my bedroom wall, my plain, boring bedroom wall. I take a long breath in, sit up and see my desk lamp has been turned on, but there's no one else in the room, and my room wouldn't have places for someone to hide unless they're in my shitty IKEA wardrobe. I get up, open my wardrobe, which obviously only has my clothes in it. Then I go investigate my desk lamp. It was one of those lamps that had 2 brightness settings. and the switch was sitting halfway between. So basically the flashes were the lamp trying to turn on, but the switch was stuck between the off setting and the lower brightness setting. I laughed and cried, both relieved and also feeling very stupid, then went back to bed.